machine had gotten a hold of it and turned it into its own story. And so you can only imagine what it feels like as a scientist when you see the beauty of God and then you see it perverted for human interest and control and abuse. He was a tortured soul for that. And he just kept finding beauty. And that's how. Montagnier, French gentleman, Montagnier. Luc Montagnier. And Luc, in 2010, wrote a paper called DNA, Waves, and Water. And I highly recommend you just tuck this, print it out and tuck it under your pillow and just sit with this. This was a moment that God touched a man, that this observation got made. And what he showed was that the waves of light interacting with water can result in nucleotides, which are the basis of DNA. And so the other mythology of humanity, the other mythology of the planet, is not one of billions of years of, floating in space without any opportunity for life, and then miraculously it just happens here. In my best meditations I've ever done, I have been able to get myself to perceive the universe from outside of the universe. And at that point you're in a space called what I call a fuzzy space. It looks like fuzz. And then when you zoom in on the fuzz, for some reason, it looks like sperm that are all crammed together and they're swimming in complete perfect chaos. And perfectly chaotic systems have been observed now in quantum physics realm of something called chaos theory to hold incredibly exquisite geometry. And so when you get a system into perfect chaos, and the example that you guys get to see on this earth of a perfectly chaotic system is a waterfall. Can't hear? How are you there? Can you hear okay in the back?
No.
You need more? Need a little bit more. Maybe if I go like this, how does that feel?
Are you going to put it on him?
Yeah.
You just need more push. Rewild that man back there. Transparent bird. I'm sure I was saying something important before that. I was talking about fuzzy space, and it looks like sperm, which is really important. The waterfall, thank you. Thanks for bringing me back to something important. The waterfall is your best example of a perfectly chaotic system. And so if you stare at a waterfall for a period of time, you'll realize that at no point does it actually create the same pattern. It's in a perfect chaotic system at the macro level as well, down at the microscopic, and then even at the quantum physics level. The interaction between the electrons and the protons of the H2O are constantly in a different pattern. Even if you observe it for 3 billion years, it will never repeat its pattern twice. So it's a perfectly chaotic system. And when they study perfectly chaotic systems of a waterfall, they get to see incredibly immaculate examples of 64 double tetrahedron, which is the shape of a black hole, or spiraling systems of the Vesica Pisces, or these complex sacred geometries that have embedded in all of our sacred arts, are found within perfectly chaotic systems. As soon as you go asymmetric, you start to express a different geometry, and geometries become a little bit more three-dimensional instead of quantum in their shapes, and so there you get the triangles and the spirals and some of the things you guys were experiencing at the soul level today. But an exquisite thing happens when you're in perfect chaos is that you get really, really good geometry. You get just perfect sacred geometry expressed at these massive macro scales. And in my experience, I was really going after what is God, because the frustrating thing about all of our other mythologies of the world is that it always starts with a being, and that doesn't make a lick of sense. Like, no, the being just didn't happen. Like, what happened before the being, and then how did the being become a being, and all of this? And so it doesn't matter which pantheon you're believing in. Like, there's something that freaking happened before that being. Something happened before Shakti. What was that? Something happened before Christ. What was that? So that was the meditation, going back in time, back in time, back in time. And all of you guys have done this probably better than I do. And many of you have come to the same realization, is that at the very beginning of what we would call a beginning, a single spot within fuzzy space, which was in perfect chaotic motion, just like a waterfall, all of energy within the entire cosmos is vibrating in its frequency. And then suddenly, for reasons that are perhaps not even important, one spot became still. It could have been a perfect collision of trillions of different elements of fuzzy space colliding in just the right way to create a moment of vector equilibrium. Vector equilibrium is where you have a bunch of darts that are pointing at each other perfectly, and it balances a system into stillness. And so that's something to think about when you're trying to meditate and you're trying to get to singularity. What are you trying to do? You're trying to reach vector equilibrium, which is really nice because I think I went into the concept of meditation around, I have to get complete stillness. And then my head would kick in and I'd start thinking that, damn it, there's a thought again. And then you're beating yourself up over the fact that you're thinking about such a stupid thing like your Rice Krispies yesterday. It's just like, well, I'm never going to get enlightened. I just thought about Rice Krispies. It's like, and it's like, I'm so far from God. Just thinking about my ex-girlfriend again, like, gee, trying to think of something big. When you realize it's vector equilibrium, not emptiness that you're going for, it's a much funner game to meditate deeply, and you get to stillness much quicker because you can think, wow, that's a big thought. That's a big feeling. That's a big thing. That's a tiny little thing. And so just let everything be in your field and realize, oh, this is perfect. Because that is a vector that's opposing that vector, opposing that vector. So you're not supposed to be in emptiness because you're freaking energy. You're a compilation of energy that's 10,000 times brighter than the sun. You should not have nothing in you. You should have everything in you. So meditate with joy of like, oh, there's a vector, there's a vector, there's a vector, there's a vector. And then reverence for that vector, reverence for how I felt when I was in that relationship, reverence for how I feel when I think of that thing, reverence for this, and reverence and reverence and gratitude and gratitude and gratitude, and then poof, stillness, because you reach vector equilibrium. Stop fighting all the stuff and accept the vectors. They are your experience. They're your Akashic records. The danger of spiritual escapism is you're trying to go numb. The opposite of being human is stop feeling. So by accident, I became a doctor for an ashram in the United States. I left the university, had a vague sense of what an ashram was, had a vague sense that I never wanted to go to yoga class because although the people look like they do when they go to an American yoga class, I clearly don't fit into that scene. And so I was like, well, vague ideas. And no formed opinion about any of it, just it's out there. And then I go out to rural Virginia to start my clinic, a nutrition center, reverse chronic disease through food. I thought I was like genius. I was like, this is amazing. I just thought of this thing. Food could actually make people healthy. This is going to be amazing. But I had to go to a rural food desert where there was no grocery stores and people reading out of gas stations because I was a medical doctor, which means I knew nothing about nutrition. And so I needed to go like the most base thing and be like, we should not eat hot dogs that have been rolling on the thing for 7 days. We should not eat Doritos and we should not drink Pepsi. Like that was my nutrition counseling. I was brilliant. It was almost painful to be around this level of genius. And so I was teaching incredible nutrition skills out in rural Virginia for a couple weeks. And then this woman walked in and said, what are you doing here? Kind of accusatory. And that was pretty typical of my experience with women overall. So, what are you doing here? I'm just a male. I'm slightly above a monkey. Just give grace. I'm not a transparent bird at all. I haven't gotten there. I'm actually a little closer to a three-toed African tree sloth, actually. But, and so she walked in, what are you doing here? I was like, well, I'm starting this whole thing. I saw this vision some years ago, and I'm going to basically transform the earth. I'm going to probably replant the Sahara Desert, and I'm probably the most amazing man that's ever lived. You know, I'm going to tell you how all this is going to happen. And I was having my Donald Trump moment of like, you can't tell me anything that's going to convince me I'm not amazing. And so I was so elated because I did have a vision and I felt like God had just shown me a bunch of stuff. I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I'm on a mission from God. Me and the Blues Brothers together, we're going to change the world. And so we were out there doing that, and this woman walked in and she said, what are you doing? And I tried to explain to her what nutrition is. It's the opposite of Doritos and Pepsi. And she said, well, I'm so glad you're here. I've been wanting to close my clinic for years and I haven't known who to hand my patients to, but I'm going to hand them to you. And I was like, oh, wow, who are your patients? She says, well, my name is Sandra McClanahan and I've been the medical doctor for Satchidananda's ashram for the last 30 years and I'm going to hand you all my patients. I was like, well, how many patients is that? She said, oh, there's like 350 residences on this ashram. And I was like, great, I have no patients. I'm making no money. This is a match made in heaven. And suddenly I was a doctor to an ashram and was witnessing the deepest levels of anxiety and social disorder that I'd ever taken care of in my life. Crippling anxiety disorders, crippling depressive disorders, crippling agoraphobia, fear of the marketplace, fear of the public. And these people had been in this ashram for decades, sliding into more and more dysfunction biologically and psychologically. And their guru had passed away about 15 years earlier. And when the guru passed, there was this pattern that began to emerge of starting to define their connection to God by the relative amount of time that they spent or how many distances they were from the guru. And in that, they lost their connection to source. And so this is when you go from ashram or temple or synagogue to cult, basically. And the cult is when you suddenly think that the direction to God was through an individual. When the guru is with you, the guru spent their entire time saying, like, I'm not your pathway to God. You've got a pathway to God. Go find that pathway. But somehow, when our gurus die, we suddenly believe that was our source. And so we see it with the Christ story and the whole Christian religion that fights wars over this stuff and will happily destroy and genocide 100 million people in North America over the belief that their God was somehow superior. Like, this is a cult. And so we have a cult of personality that emerges. But in the end, it was an interesting thing because I was a cancer doctor making chemotherapy at the university, and then suddenly I'm in an ashram and I'm taking care of severe anxiety that it was crippling, that was not, the drugs were not working for. This was severe anxiety. These people, I was taking care of some people who hadn't slept more than 2 or 3 hours in 20 years. They were so biologically crippled by anxiety and insomnia that you just couldn't even really ask them to do anything. They couldn't put words together. They couldn't function. And what I found by accident, it happened in my clinic one day when a woman who I'd been trying to manage her anxiety came in with a sprained ankle. And I was putting her through a lot of pain, manipulating her ankle, trying to get her ankle to decompress and trying to get this opened up. And she was in so much pain. And I was about an hour into this treatment of her ankle when she suddenly just gasped and looked at me and she's like, my anxiety's gone. And I was like, well, what do you mean it's gone? And she's like, no, it's gone. Like, I haven't felt this way maybe ever in my life. It's amazing. And I was like, well, did God come into the room? What happened? She's like, nothing happened. It just went away. I was like, well, that's amazing. Like, but I didn't really know what to put on it. And she came back about a month later and said, my anxiety's coming back. And I'm like, oh, really? Well, how's your ankle doing? And start messing around with her ankle again. And about 20 minutes in, and I was like, oh, you know what? You've got 2 or 3 ribs out. Your spine's not quite right. I'm just going to work on your back. And I was working on her back and spine, and she gasped, and she says, my anxiety's gone. And I'm like, wait, what? I'm like, what's going on here? Over the course of the next couple of months with this woman, and she kept coming in with the anxieties creeping back, and then she would suddenly have it go away again. And the only time it would go away was when I was basically putting her in pain. And what I realized over that time is she had spent so much time in spiritual escapism that she had abandoned the body. And the massive anxiety she was feeling was a soul pleading with her to get back in the body. You're living another breath and you're not feeling it. Please get in your body and feel this thing. Please remember what it feels like to have a sexual thought or have some sort of physical experience of pleasure. Please taste your food again. Please run. Just go run in a field. Instead, the whole world was telling her value was in sitting on the mat and being outside the body and do Kundalini again and get out of the body and go elevate. Do it again. I think this is actually the story of anxiety worldwide, is souls desperately wanting to feel a finite body and not being allowed to do it. That's what anxiety is. There's no other way that a soul could be anxious. what would make a soul that's been here since the beginning of time anxious? If it chose a finite experience so that it could feel everything and it's not being allowed to feel it. Or it's feeling it and the feelings are being denied, literally denied. This makes you psychotic. And so I think that what I witnessed in the ashram there was souls going psychotic over the desire to be human at this moment. But every time they'd start to feel pain, they thought they weren't meditating enough, or they didn't think they were being spiritual enough, or they didn't think they were being righteous enough. And so I started a really simple methodology for getting all of my patients out of anxiety. And it didn't matter if they were at the ashram or they were CEOs flying in from Atlanta. It didn't matter. I knew how to get them out of anxiety. And what I did was I'd start to slap their feet. And so I'd put them on my exam table and I'd start slapping their feet. I'd take their shoes off and start slapping the bottom of their feet and start yelling at them. This is your foot. This is your foot. And they'd start to laugh a little bit and then they'd start to cry. And I would just keep slapping their feet and then their ankles and slap their ankles. This is your ankle. This is your ankle. This is your left ankle. Feel your ankle. And then they're crying and they're crying and they're crying. They don't even know why they're crying. They're getting back in the body and they're slapping their legs and they're starting to feel, by the time you're slapping their belly and you're slapping their shoulders, they're a child again. You could take them from nearly dead with anxiety to childlike exuberance over about 35 minutes of slapping a person around. I know many of you have tried this with your spouse, but it doesn't work so well. You actually have to have a third party come in and slap your spouse. I don't know why everybody's laughing at that. You guys really have tried that. That's interesting. The other mythology of the world is that the universe is stacking itself so that it can feel itself. And so the way in which light hits water is so sentient. Have you seen water pierced by light? Is there anything more beautiful? Have you been able to dive under the water and look up at the way in which water refracts as you look back up towards the surface of the water? It's staggeringly beautiful. Staggeringly alive. And what we now know is that if that light is shining through sacred geometry onto water, it will stack nucleotides in a genetic sequence with a particular shape. Somebody here was a fish. That wasn't you? No, she felt very embarrassed that you claimed fish. That was you, the fish. Somebody was fish, and so fish happened when the right nucleotide sequence was expressed with the right light shining through some piece of fuzzy space, and then hit a planet with water, and suddenly life occurred. And what I started to see with that one speck of stillness in the universe is it couldn't help, but everywhere it looked, it started to see sacred geometry. And the moment it witnessed sacred geometry, the geometry had to become solid, because that's what it witnessed does. It takes everything from wave to particle. And so that one speck of space is God. God is the original witness. And when one thing witnessed another speck of space and suddenly there was a 64 double tetrahedron, suddenly there was a black hole that particleized and it sucked a bunch of fuzzy space into it until there was so much fuzzy space being compressed that it exploded and it was the universe. And the 64 double tetrahedron was a universe. And the moment there was a universe, there was so much density in one spot that it created a billion little still spots. So inside every atom is a proton. And the proton was recently recognized to have the exact same geometry as a freaking black hole in the middle of your galaxy, a 64 double tetrahedron. And so witness and witness and witness and particle and particle and particle and particle and particle. And so the universe could have actually occurred in a split second when everything started to witness itself. And so the witnessing all particleized the universe out of nothing. And some recent calculations have blown my mind, everybody's mind, which is that if you took all of the particles in all of our universe and crushed them into a single cubic centimeter, I'm talking about every planet, every star. Remember, we have 2.5 trillion galaxies, each with 4 billion stars, each with millions of planets around it. You crush all all of that down into a single cubic centimeter. 1 cubic centimeter of vacuum space sitting next to that has more density by 13 zeros than all of the particles of the universe crushed into the same one.
Say it again.
1 cubic centimeter of vacuum space has more density to it than all of the particles in the entire universe pushed into the same cubic centimeter. How is that possible? How is that possible? Thank you for asking the question. Everybody was wondering the same thing. So it's possible because vacuum space is not empty. It turns out that vacuum space is full of energy. And the vibration of the electromagnetic field in a vacuum has been measured. And it's what gave us Planck's constant. Maybe you've heard of that in some vague threshold. And if you liked math as much as you forgot it as quickly as possible. Planck's constant is the length of the wave of energy as it vibrates in the electromagnetic field of vacuum space. And a brilliant man that many of you follow probably, Nassim Haramein, came along at the School of Mines in Colorado and said, I wonder how much that weighs. All those little, the Planck's constant is the tiniest thing that's ever been measured. The universe is the largest thing we've actually measured. Tiniest thing we've measured is Planck's constant. And so he started to think, well, what a lot of those fit inside of a cubic centimeter. And so, okay, it was cubic centimeter vacuum space, make the calculation. Holy cow, it's 1 with 96 zeros after it. That's a bigger number than almost anything in the measured universe has ever even fathomed as a number. I wonder how much mass is in the entire universe. And he found out it's 13 zeros shy of 1 cubic centimeter of the vibrating electromagnetic field. In other words, so far, the universe has expressed 1 centimeter of its potential. Whoa, that's a really big universe, measured in thousands of millions of light years. And 1 cubic centimeter has been expressed to give us 2.5 trillion galaxies, each with 4 billion suns. It's too marvelous, folks. It's too beautiful. It's too vast. And yet it's just begun. The play has just begun in this universe. And we sit within a fuzzy verse that holds many universes. And so within this universe, a witnessing happened. And complex geometries were witnessed, and there was more and more still places to see more and more geometry, and more particles occurred, and the stacking of life begins. We are surrounded by green trees in this building. Just look outside for a minute and appreciate those guys. Thank you. Give gratitude to the green of those leaves. You would not be here without them. It's the chlorophyll inside of those that innovated life to occur. What happens with chlorophyll is it's figured out how to store photons of sunlight between carbon molecules to create a carbon bond. CO2 is grabbed by the chlorophyll, another CO2 is grabbed, and a photon of sunlight is stored between the 2 carbons. It is the most perfect battery ever created because if you stack those, you end up with what we call glucose or fatty acids, these long carbon chains. And then if you let that tree die in the fall and the leaves fall on the ground and they're composted into the soil, and all of that carbon is stored in different lengths of carbon chains within the soil metabolites and everything else. And then seasons go by and life is witnessing life and the beauty's happening and the carbon of that soil level gets pushed down deep into the earth. And 250 million years later, there's a layer of oil deep within the earth that used to be soil. And you pull that oil back out in its long carbon chains. And you break those carbon chains apart by either burning it or digesting it. And the same amount of sunlight is still in there 250 million years later. No battery we've ever created as humans can even come close. If you leave a battery on the countertop, not plugged into anything, it will be dead in about 2 years. It's leaking energy. It's not an efficient battery. Carbon is the perfect battery for sunlight. Life cannot happen without it, is my theory. Maybe some people would disagree. Sulfur might be able to do it on some other planets as well. But carbon is our battery that stores sunlight, and the sunlight is being stored by chlorophyll putting together long carbon chains. And the long carbon chains are storing light energy. And I mentioned earlier today that a single cell within this fetus growing within its mother's womb requires 10,000 times more sunlight than the surface of the sun is capable of producing in the same cubic centimeter. And so blow your mind over this. So far, the universe has expressed 1 cubic centimeter of its full potential energy. And every living cell burns 10,000 times brighter than a sun. Life is magnificently bright. Magnificently bright. And so what started to begin our journey into our current awareness of self was the demise of the human ego. And to do that, we were going to have to bring ourselves to the brink of neurologic collapse. Because if you have a neuron and you're human, you're going to donate a lot of potential energy into maintaining the ego.
Can you repeat that? Sorry. Can you repeat that one more time?
If you have any metabolic reserve as a human, you're going to put a significant portion of that into maintaining the ego. A friend of mine texted me sometime overnight, and I woke up this morning to her text. I haven't reached out to you in a long time. I hope I'm not bothering you, but I'm totally heartbroken. I just admitted my mother to an Alzheimer's unit. I need some help. Totally heartbroken. I think it was Mother Ganga herself speaking through me, and just this beautiful message came through of praise your mother. She has finally put down the ego. Your mother has chosen a path in which she would forget all of her stories and still be here, and still hold space among us with no more energy left to put to the ego. And so can we just close our eyes for a minute and witness how many women have chosen Alzheimer's in the last 20 years? More than in any time in history combined. There's a fleet of souls, tens of millions of them, that have chosen a life of forgetting, to the point of forgetting their loved ones, forgetting their own stories, forgetting their own history, with an intact brain. It's the marvelously weird thing about when you hang out with an Alzheimer's patient, they're still smart, they're brilliant, they got all their stuff, but they don't know their story. They have been willing to give it up. They are the brightest souls among us because they are unmasked. They have let down the ego. To get there, they had to be willing to forget everything. This is ultimately where you will end up. There will be a moment of consciousness that happens as you take your last few breaths, where there's no more energy left to put into the ego, and it will drop. And do you know what the body does when the ego drops? It breathes. It's called Kussmaul breathing. As a hospice doctor, I saw this on a daily basis. Daily basis, I would watch bodies that had often been in comas or stage 4 cancer for years, skeletons. I watched women who could not lift their head off a pillow for months. They were on tube feeds, and then finally the tube feeds didn't work, and the family finally decided to stop the tube feeds, and they had digested their entire bodies, and they had no metabolic function left, could not lift a hand, let alone their head. They were just... And then suddenly, the ego drops, usually 2 to 4 hours, sometimes 2 to 4 days, but usually 2 to 4 hours before death. That woman suddenly takes the deepest breath of air she's ever taken in her living life. You guys know how hard it is to breathe. When somebody starts yelling at you in yoga, like, take a deep breath. You're like, it takes a lot of energy to breathe. And that woman's body, still unconscious, goes into its most conscious moment. The ego's gone. I am in a body. I am going to breathe like I've never breathed before. And she breathes so deep. Every bone expanding. Everything just an expansion. She takes a massive breath and then she lets it out and then she does it again. And she'll be pushing air like that for 2 hours straight. I mean, the amount of metabolic source, you don't even know where she's drawing energy from because it's not from her body now. She's in the quantum field. She's pulling it in from soul source. She's pulling it in from another centimeter of the universe. She is pulling in energy into her body so she can take another phenomenal breath. her mouth is caked with just saliva that's just solid because there's no energy to put left into saliva. Like she's just like, only breath. Just let me breathe one more time. And then she stops breathing. And after a few seconds, the nurses start moving. Doctor's called. Somebody starts to write down the time of death. And then that woman starts breathing again. Small breathing, they can go without breath for 3 or 4 minutes. And then suddenly they just start breathing like a banshee again. And they are breathing so hard you can't even believe it. That's what the soul wants to feel, is breath. It's the last thing it will do without the ego. The first thing it will do when the ego drops is I want to breathe without an ego. I want to feel what it feels like to expand a human chest and feel breath inside of me, then go into my bloodstream. I want to see the breath of a bird end up in my lungs now. An incredible study was just done that I just am so grateful that some scientists are starting to ask questions like this. But they started to study the bird song in the mornings in a bunch of different ecosystems and their impact of the bird song on the trees. And they found out something beautiful. A few months ago it was published that the song of the birds in the morning in each ecosystem is specifically designed to open the pores of the specific species of trees so they breathe better. The morning birds open the respiratory capacity of trees to breathe. Why do birds sing in the morning? To help the trees breathe better. Whoa. Whoa, that feels good in my body when I think about that. That feels so good that the bird song opens the respiratory path of a tree. The ego is blocking your breath. It's okay that you're terrible at breathing because you're human. You were born to have an egoic journey. No judgment on it. But it's why we're not breathing. It's because we're too afraid to be a transparent bird. We're too afraid to feel what it feels like to take a real breath because we're afraid we'd stop doing everything else. Because we think that everything happening around us is our responsibility. What is the likelihood that an oak tree would trust a single part of its biology to you? No. Nature was not waiting for you to come along. She imagined herself through you instead. Because she wanted to be seen. The bird opens the breath of the tree, and the tree's growth factors respond when you love it. That has also been shown. When a human tells a plant, you are beautiful, it grows faster. Wow. The bird will open the respiratory tract, and you will inspire it to grow bigger. Because you saw the beauty of the tree. Because you have 5 senses that were given to you that gave you the perception of separateness so that you could see the beauty of the tree. You became willing to go on a human journey of separation and abandonment and all of the bullshit stories that go with that and all of the pain and suffering that will come with that to be part of the witness of nature. That's why you showed up. You were willing to go through the painful journey so that you could, for a moment, see the beauty in something else. That's it. That's why you're here. That's the whole story. And what a relief. And so in 1976, we added a chemical to our food system that would take us to the knees, take us to our knees here. This molecule, glyphosate, is the most ubiquitous molecule that's man-made on the surface of the planet now. We pour 4 billion pounds of this chemical into our soil and water systems a year. 4 billion. It's such a massive number. Like, factories are making 4 billion pounds of something is ridiculous. So for every year that this planet has been here, we pour another pound of glyphosate into her soils each year. It's just a ludicrous number. And this molecule is what my laboratory has been studying for the last 15 years. And what we've learned is that it is the most effective molecule at shutting down metabolism of the mitochondria. And why is that important? It's because the mitochondria are the ones that are grabbing those long carbon chains made by the chlorophyll and turning it back into sunlight. The reason you are 10,000 times brighter than the sun is because the bacteria are taking all that glucose and fatty acids from the tree and sending it into your bloodstream, from the bloodstream to the mitochondria. The bacteria of your gut are literally nursemating and feeding, nurturing the mitochondria inside your cells. A single human cell has 200 mitochondria. 200 mitochondria. You go look in a biology textbook, it'll show you 2. There's 200, unless it's a neuron. If it's a nerve cell in the brain of an Alzheimer's woman, for example, that neuron has 2,000 mitochondria in the axonal body. 2,000 mitochondria that are breaking carbon apart to release sunlight. That's what's happening. You are a light being, brighter than suns, liberated by the energy of mitochondria. Mitochondria have to surpass all logic in regards to the amount of energetics to get the quantum entanglement between a soul and biology. We call this conception. So a neuron has 2,000, your average cell has 200. How many do you think the egg of a woman holds? How many mitochondria in a single egg that you stem from? The answer is 500,000. There are 500,000 mitochondria crammed in an egg. One cell. The moment of conception is noted as the zinc flash. Look this up on Google. Watch the video. It blinds the microscope the moment conception occurs. The flash of light that happens out of that egg is so blindingly bright that the microscope literally goes blind for a moment. That is the moment of quantum entanglement with your soul. It takes an explosion of energy, millions of times brighter than a sun, to get a soul to be able to hit and imprint your identity onto that cell. Today, we are on a march into dimness. And so this is what this looks like over time. We added the chemical glyphosate in 1976 to the food and water system. By the early 1980s, we had these rumbles coming out of the United States that we had an obesity epidemic that had hit the world by the late 80s. After obesity, so what is obesity? Obesity is the phenomenon where you are eating the same calories in 1979 as in 1981. There was no increase suddenly in metabolic intake. What happened is the mitochondria were poisoned inside the human cell by glyphosate in its residues that were quite minimal at the time. And suddenly the mitochondria couldn't take the carbon chains and release sunlight. And so all of those potential calories, all that light was sent back to the liver. The body said, oh, we can't burn it here. The factory's gummed up, send it back to the delivery source, which is the liver. As soon as you start storing fat in the liver, you start to get insulin resistance. And so within 5 years, we had a diabetes epidemic. This turns into a very vicious cycle very quickly because diabetes is a phenomenon where the insulin doesn't work to get the glucose inside the cell, which is where the mitochondria will consume it and turn it back into light. So now you have a double whammy on metabolism. You can't get the calorie to where it's supposed to be, and even if it gets there, you can't burn it. And so you got to send twice as much back to the liver. Diabetes is a phenomenon of double down on a broken supply chain of energy. And the lights dim inside of every single cell. And so aging accelerates in the diabetic foot, and you get diabetic ulcers. You get diabetic neuropathy because there's no longer 2,000 mitochondria per neuron. You're dimming the lights. Allergy happens within a few years of diabetes because allergy is a description of a failure of relationship at the immune system level. Every medical school in the world today continues to teach that the immune system is a battleground and a sterile human body is a healthy human body. That flies in the face of the last 30 years of genomics, but we just can't break our mentality that humans are obviously the most intelligent, most important being on the earth, so we must need our space. Genetics has shown us the opposite, which is a healthy human body actually has an extraordinary amount of ecosystem within it. And the more ecosystem you have, the healthier you get. The more biodiversity inside of a human body, the healthier you get. And everybody's come to kind of embrace, okay, yeah, gut health is good. Gut health is good, like bacteria here. That's just the beginning of the story. We now know that there is actually microbiome in the brain of humans that are healthy. There's bacteria and fungi that are supposed to be living in your brain to nursemaid to your optimal detox capacity and repair rate, microbiome in your brain. There's microbiome in your prostate, in your breast, in your organ systems throughout your body have soil within them. The immune system is a system of relationships. It is not a battleground. It is a system built on amnesty and a giving economy, a gifting economy. When there is no longer enough energy to maintain relationships, you start to dysfunction and react to everything. Let me repeat that. When there is not enough energy to maintain the relationship, you become reactive to everything. How many of you have tried to have a human relationship? Emphasis on the word try. How much energy did that relationship take versus other activities? All of it. Has anybody ever had a child? How much energy did that take? All of it. It takes all of your energy as a human consciousness to be in relationship. It is the most energy demanding thing that we know, and is relationship. This is why you have to burn 10,000 times brighter as a multicellular creature than the sun. The sun doesn't have a relationship. They have to be like billions of light years away from each other. They're like the ultimate loners, like no relationship. Takes almost no energy. I just burn bright, motherfuckers. Feels good. I'm bright. It's all dark out there and I'm bright. You can see me from so far away. I'm tiny, but I'm actually big. It's easy to be a star. But to be a river with bacteria and fungi and protozoa, parasites and fish and humans, it takes so much energy to create life because life requires so many relationships to make it happen. There's a single word that comes to embody that, and it's biosis. Another permutation of that word is biotic. The chemical glyphosate was patented as an herbicide, weed killer, in 1976, 74. In the early 80s, they realized that they could repatent it. Patents run out internationally and everything else after about 25, 30 years, depending on the type of patent. So they needed to keep churning patents away, knowing that someday that patent was going to run out. So most companies will keep patenting. So next was an antibiotic. 5 years later than that, antifungal. 5 years after that, antiparasite. They knew this thing killed all of life, but they just gently kind of rolled out the patents. Antibiotic. Biosis, the relationships that make life possible. Biotic, in reference to the relationships in their network that make life possible. Antibiotic, what would happen if we started pouring antibiotics into our soils and food systems and water systems at billions of pounds a year, and then started showing up with disease for the breakdown in energy and the breakdown of relationships, and therefore the doctor gives you an antibiotic on top of it? Antibiotic. If we had just looked up the definition, we probably would have gone a different direction, but we're terrible at etymology. And so, truth in advertising. And I believe it's going to save the pharmaceutical companies, because they can't be sued if they told us the truth. Nobody's going to be able to sue them when they find out that the humanitarian collapse of life on Earth, the inhumane collapse, was due to antibiotics. They'll say, we put it right in the title. Like, what did you expect? What did you expect? And the answer is allergy. When you don't have enough energy, when metabolism drops, enough light energy, you now start reacting to everything. To see what this looks like at the macro level, you just watch American politics. When you don't have enough energy to maintain relationships as a falling empire, you move from debate to argument. You move from intelligent discussion to polarization. We are expressing the collapsing in relationships due to the collapsing energy on a planet that is under the pressure of a massive antibiotic technology revolution. After allergy, if you stay allergic and you start reacting to everything else around you, you inevitably become autoimmune. And so you stop reacting to everything else and you start reacting to self. And I would say all of us have experienced autoimmunity in our psyche. There's nobody that you are more destructive on than yourself. You are an autoimmune force because you have been reactive for too long towards everything around you because you didn't have enough energy to maintain relationships. You are an autoimmune disease of yourself. You have become your enemy. As this continues to cascade, now we're around 1998 in the United States, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is inevitable in children because it turns out that one of the most complex relational things that the neurologic system does is attention. The only thing more difficult than attention is sleep. Sleep takes an enormous amount of energy to do it. Who's suffered with insomnia? Insomnia is the phenomenon of not enough energy to go to sleep. It's a vicious cycle because you start to miss sleep and you start to destroy yourself again, autoimmune in the head. You're fighting yourself so viciously. And that turns into this insomnia cascade. Attention deficit is a child witnessing the world, sensing everything and not enough energy to put that into patterns, to recognize the beauty of everything. And it just feels overwhelmed. Autism spectrum disorder by 1998 is when we started to go through our vertical spectrum here. Alzheimer's in women, Parkinson's in males. All of them went up simultaneously. Within 2 years of this, we realized MS, ALS, all of these neurodegenerative conditions going up logarithmically. Not because of vaccines or anything else you've heard. And this is my one big frustration with functional medicine and the anti-vax people and everything else is like, can we stop demonizing each other and just witness that we are collapsing life? Just do that. Because it's not the vaccines that are causing autism. We took the same MMR in the 1970s that did no harm. In the 1990s, the damn thing is doing massive harm because the brain doesn't have enough immunologic reserve to deal with the insult of the vaccine. The vaccine is unmasking a metabolic collapse in our children. And Robert Kennedy and all the rest, God bless him, a good friend of mine, and I've had this discussion with him, so this is not news to anybody, but the longer we try to point our fingers out there and say there's Darth Vader, the longer we're going to forget that we are the son of Darth Vader. Like, Luke Skywalker is the son of Darth Vader. Can we just appreciate that for a moment? Like, why do we keep forgetting that? Why do we keep demonizing Darth Vader, who was just a poorly adapted father? So what happens after attention deficit and hyperactivity and the rest? Sorry for that. Cancer comes next. And I mentioned earlier today that we are seeing cancer in 2-year-olds that used to happen in 80-year-olds. And so this is the cumulative epigenetic damage happening in generations expressed in children that have less metabolic capacity than their grandparents did. My great-grandmother lived a horribly toxic life. She was born in West Virginia in a coal town, was exposed to the highest levels of junk you can possibly imagine. She ate asbestos for breakfast. Like, I mean, the woman was just toxic and lived to 102 in complete joy and without disease. Because she was born in a metabolic state that was so freaking resilient. You give her a challenge, she's like, I'm stronger. That's what a good body does. A body with unfettered access to information and energy only gets stronger every time you challenge it. A body with unfettered access to information and energy cannot get disease. And my great-grandmother proved it. Oh, you can poison me my entire life. She was born in 1898. That's weird, like, that's a long time ago. She dies in 2000. Can you imagine the cumulative toxicity of that century in a human body? She had it all. She lived through World War I. Mustard gas. By the way, if somebody tells you that, what about Spanish flu and therefore pandemics are scary? Spanish flu was the biggest crock of lies that we've ever been told. That happened in 1917, 1918. The summer before that all happened, Spanish flu presumably killed 20 million people. It turns out that the summer before, we poured more mustard gas into the atmosphere than had ever existed in space-time, let alone planetary history. And mustard gas destroys the membranes of the human lungs like no other gas. And we went and said that was Spanish flu. We poisoned the hell out of ourselves in the end of World War I. And my grandmother was 17. At 102, she was eating canned peaches, which is probably the most toxic thing you could put into a human being. Preserved canned peaches in a martini, and she was a happy camper. So she starts life on mustard gas and finishes with martinis, and she's bulletproof. Mamie Ferguson. She sold her house at 97 years old, and my cousin who she called, she's like, Jamie, I want to sell my house. He's like, Granny, we're so glad. We were so worried about you living alone and everything else. And like, she's like, what the hell are you talking about? I just want to invest in the stock market. And he's like, well, Granny, you're 97. Like, it's a little bit of a long shot. Like, that's more of a long-term investment, gently. She's like, Jamie, I'm selling my house. I want to invest. So she sells her house that she had owned for 70 years in Potomac, Maryland. She had bought it for $22,000. She sold it for $2.5 million. She invested $2.5 million in 1997. Over the next 3 years, the stock market does things that nobody's ever seen before and goes through this vertical growth. My grandmother nailed it better than anybody else out there. She trained a bunch of the greats. Warren Buffett was one of her students. She calls him up in 2000 and says, I want to sell all my stock. I want to put it into some trusts. I want to distribute it to my kids, all this. She forgot her great-grandkids in the trust, that's right. She put her money in there, and about 10 months later, 9/11 happens, the stock market crashes, the whole thing goes to crap. She called it perfectly. So that woman is perfect because she had so much light energy in her. She burned so bright. And anybody who ever met Mamie Ferguson would say, that is a bright woman. And her great-great-grandchildren who got to know her, my children got to know their great-great-grandmother quite well, which is pretty spectacular, are carrying her disease. All of the toxins that she stored up over those 100 years were not expressing in her body. It was expressing in her grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and most of all their great-great-grandchildren. Can you imagine what that looks like when you pass across the veil and realize that your unawareness in life is the disease of your great-grandchildren? The heartbreak that we see on the other side of the veil must be so deep. And yet every patient that died under my care and came back to tell me what they saw on the other side, it was the same story. I am completely accepted and the whole thing is perfect. So how is it perfect? This cascade is happening. After cancer is infertility. Why that? We call it lots of different things. Failure of sperm counts, failure of sperm, polycystic ovarian syndrome. We go all kinds of names. What's happening is that there's no longer 500,000 mitochondria in the egg. Ooh. What happens when the egg starts to lose its flash potential? A soul can't entangle with the cell. Whoa. What does extinction look like? When the metabolic function of a species can no longer flash bright enough to allow a soul to imprint. And then we go away. Because we can't connect to the indelible permanence of soul. So that was by 2010 in the United States. My children were 12 and 10. Over the next 10 years, deep endocrine collapse and genomic instability would emerge within our population. The endocrine collapse looked like chronic fatigue syndrome, adrenal burnout, adrenal fatigue, chronic regional pain syndromes, deep instability in the detox pathways, the whole MTHFR story and everything else that emerged. We can no longer clear the methylated breakdown products. The final piece is gender dissolution. It turns out that every fetus begins at neutral, neither male or female. And partway through the journey into its 9-month expression, there's an explosion of energy. It's the first puberty. And this massive energetic happening, and then the fetus will become male or female. And when it becomes male or female, it will change the growth patterns of breast tissue, will go either ovary or testy, clitoris or penis. The pattern will emerge phenotypically on the physical side. But on the neurologic side, much more subtle and much more sensitive to the failure of full expression of masculine or full expression of feminine is the nuclei in the deep brain. It turns out there's about 6 different nuclei in the deep brain that when exposed to high testosterone, some will shrink and some will grow. When exposed to estrogen, some will shrink and some will grow. And this leads to the behavioral traits of masculine and feminine. And that neurologic expression is far more sensitive to the phenotypic expression of the penis or the clitoris. So what we're finding is that we now have the expression of a species that no longer recognizes at the brain level its differentiation into masculine and feminine. My daughter is one of the most brilliant, bright souls on the planet. My goodness, she probably came in with too many mitochondria. Like, she's just like, wah! And so she had to go to Broadway. So she went in American Musical Drama Academy on Broadway, and she gets on stage and she's like, wah! And she can light up a whole stadium, right? Her peers went through an incredible journey of LGBTQ, the whole letter alphabet, because they were experiencing a reality that didn't fit into the baskets of the masculine and feminine, because their brains had developed under a different metabolic reserve than any generation in history. And they were suddenly like, no, this doesn't work. Everything you're telling me isn't working for my brain. And they're telling us this, and we start pretending it's like George Soros or something like this. It is literally the reality for these children. They are showing us what 200 years of chemical toxicity looks like. It's a metabolic collapse, and I will hold neutral until you see your wound. I will hold neutral until you admit that you have poisoned yourself. Until you come to terms with the fact that you are complete and never needed to be male or female. You are source. This generation was prophesied by how many indigenous cultures? It was known that we would come to a point where neither masculine nor feminine would rule anymore, and we would come to neutral. Well, we have come to neutral. And it is my grandson's generation that is most expressing this now. I was very blessed. I got to an acceleration of generations in my family. My kids finished college early, and so on my son's first day of college at age 14, he met his now wife. They've been together for 13 years. And she had a young kiddo from a previous marriage. She's German, amazing woman, single mom at the time kind of thing. And I got to watch her son grow up. And I didn't know at the time that he was going to be my grandson. Because your son falls in love at 14, you're not really thinking marriage quite yet. At least I wasn't. And so when they got married years later and that young man became my grandson, I realized that I was watching a radical difference between his generation and my daughter's generation. His generation knows no LGBTQ thing. There is no alphabet soup going on. And they've stopped identifying themselves as sexual or gendered. They're starting to identify each other as creative beings. It's beautiful. This generation is beautiful to hear and listen to. Physiologically, it's a crisis. His graduating class, the male phenotype is growing breasts. The female has underdeveloped breasts and is hairy in her suit and has polycystic ovarian syndrome, is obese. Their phenotype is dying so that they can show us the beauty of a soul. And remind us that we are not human, we are ancient souls. And we came in to have an experience together. to feel everything. And his generation is feeling everything. And in the United States, we will hit 1 in 3 children with autism spectrum disorder by 2035. 1 in 3. Today we're around 1 in 10, 1 in 15, somewhere in that range. What is autism spectrum disorder? It is an unfiltered brain. It is a sensory processing deficit. You're feeling everything and can't process it, and so you get overwhelmed, and so the brain can't express itself for all of its overwhelm. We can all be autistic. I was nearly autistic when I came here. 2 days without sleep, I can't process information. I'm having a hard time completing sentences. I get really overwhelmed by other people's emotions in that state. And what I found with autism that was so amazing in my clinic was that we could not really get an autistic child to move away from its apparent suffering until we started working on the parents. And what we witnessed over time was miraculous, was that the child is not showing us its own suffering. It is showing us the collective suffering of the household. Grandmother in the Alzheimer's unit, willing to forget everything so she can become present. Grandchild with autism, willing to feel everything, unfiltered, and express it back to us. Those are 2 angelic generations that have come onto this planet. And then there's the sandwich generation, as we call them. They're right now kind of between the ages of 35 and 45. And this generation, which typically in history was like they were at their maximum productivity level. They were out starting the companies, running the companies, taking over the family offices, doing the things. In the sandwich generation, they're suddenly overwhelmed because they waited a little extra long to have children. And maybe they needed 3 rounds of in vitro fertilization to get that first child. And so now they're 35 years old with their first child, 2 years old, and their grandmother passes away, and mother just got diagnosed with Alzheimer's in her late 50s. That sandwich generation is the one I think that we need to rush to support right now and realize how much energy they're putting forward just to keep their head above water right now. And what we're really asking them to do is just witness the suffering in your children and in your mother in the Alzheimer's ward. Witness it. Feel everything for your child and feel everything for your mother, and we are going to give you the space to feel it. And so adopt somebody who's 35 years old right now and just invite them into your life and say, how can I help you? You're about to be right in the middle of a pressure cooker that's never happened in human history, and how can we support you? Because you are the generation that is being called to witness. And so if anybody needs to learn how to breathe and be still, it's our women in particular, but men as well, between the ages of 25 and 45 right now. That generation needs mindfulness like no other time, because if it comes still, it may be able to break the pattern in both directions. You guys know that healing happens in scalar waves in both directions. If you solve the problem now, it goes rippling through the ancestors and all the way into the future generations simultaneously. Healing is scalar. Scalar is the 3rd dimension of the electromagnetic field. Electricity flows one way, magnetism goes 90 degrees to that. That's the right-hand screw rule that you got somewhere in the line. The z-axis, the 3rd dimension of the electromagnetic field, is scalar. It's the only wave that goes bidirectional in physics. It travels in both directions simultaneously. That's scalar wave. Healing, I premise, is a scalar wave phenomenon. And it goes in all directions at once. If you are 25 to 45 years old and you witness what it feels like to suffer the separation for God so that you can see beauty, healing will happen simultaneously in both directions. And our elders will remember themselves, and our children will begin able to process their feelings. And so can we come alongside of you and just bless you now with stillness and help you witness the beauty around you? And may the scalar wave go both directions, my brother.
What did you say happened in 1998 around then?
1998 was really the birthplace of what we now call the chronic disease epidemic. So that's where everything went logarithmic. And so right around 1998, we see a sudden doubling and quadrupling of the rates of disease in the neurology in particular. So that was attention deficit, autism, and all that. Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, all went up at the same time. But the same map occurred with leukemias, lymphomas, solid cancers of bladder, thyroid, etc. And so it was at this moment where the stacking of disease suddenly got out of control.
So in 1995, the FDA approves OxyContin for use in end-of-life patients. The justification for it was that a patient who was dying in extreme pain couldn't make it through the night on the existing opiates.
Mm-hmm.
And that apparently this opiate was going to last through the night. And what an incredible thing that a person didn't have to be woken up in the middle of the night in the hospital to give them and administer more opiates. It was a lie. It was one of the most addictive forms of opiates ever, and the result of it was that something around 1 million Americans, just Americans, died from opiate overdose in the ensuing 20 years in 1995. Can you put that into that timeline as an understanding of part of our attempt to respond to also addiction and playing there? I just want to say that the FDA and all of its brilliance, 20 years later, after all this data is in, decided to approve the use of OxyContin for children from 11 to 16 years old, where that had always been prohibited before. So, I mean, it's making perfect sense to me, and I just want to, could you bring that into the discussion?
Yeah, so the question is around the advent of the long-acting narcotics that came along in the mid-1990s. He was talking about OxyContin, which is a long-acting form of oxycodone, basically, which is a more potent, sharper on-spike of the receptors for the narcotics than something like morphine. Morphine's a slower onset. So oxycodone had this very rapid onset, and then OxyContin holds it. And so rapid onset, long plateau, and the concept was now you can sleep through the night without pain. And so that's how they got it on the market and got it approved. All of these drugs are approved for less than 2 weeks of use, because anything longer screws up metabolism, screws up all kinds of different things. Of course, that's not how doctors prescribe them or patients use them. They turn into chronic almost immediately. So this all started around 1998 was really the cascade. So you'll remember in the mid-1990s, around 96 is when we started to really diagnose fibromyalgia as a common syndrome. It was not a coincidence that it was simultaneous to that 1994-96 when we started to diagnose celiac disease. So what happened in that period of time is that in 1991, the first farmer started pouring glyphosate on wheat right before it was harvested for the first time. Not to kill a weed, but to kill the wheat faster, because you have to get the wheat dry before you harvest it or else it molds. And this was a farmer up in Ireland who got the news that there was going to be rain early. The winter was coming early and he was going to lose his crop. And then he thought through himself, late at night, like, wait, when I accidentally hit wheat with glyphosate, it's like dry the next morning. So he literally just went out and sprayed his entire wheat field with glyphosate. Came back 24 or 48 hours later and the thing was just crisp dry. Fantastic. Harvested it, sent it to market, saved the day, started telling his neighbors. Within a year, Monsanto heard this story, repatented it as a desiccating agent for wheat, and by 1993 it was all over the world as a wheat drying agent. And then we said everybody had gluten sensitivity. We had glyphosate poisoning people. So that was the first paper I published with my laboratory back in like 2013 or so, like that. We showed the exact mechanism by which glyphosate creates gluten sensitivity.
How great that everybody listened to you.
Nobody knew my name at that time, that's for sure. So the journey of pain is always going to travel alongside of dysfunction of the immune system. And so those things travel hand in hand, because dysfunction of the immune system leads to inflammation, inflammation to pain. And so the collapse of the immune system under the direct application of glyphosate to our food started in wheat, but then it quickly, by 1993, we had genetically modified Roundup Ready squash. It's not recognized that. Nobody's heard of that. Everybody's corn and soybean, but squash was actually the first one. Then 1996, soybean and corn, same year. By 2006, 95% of all soybean grown globally was genetically modified and being sprayed directly with Roundup throughout its lifespan. 86% of the the corn crop. And so these plants were now being saturated throughout their life cycle. So that's when we saw everything go exponential, is when our rates or our residues of Roundup went exponential between 1992 and 1998. And so when you hear GMO or genetically modified anything, what you're saying is, I'm getting glyphosate poisoning. And now it's not just glyphosate poisoning. The United States now grows 5 chemical seed GMOs, which means the same seed is genetically modified to handle Roundup, atrazine, 2,4-D, which is Agent Orange, and Liberty Link, which is from Bayer. Bayer created that about 15 years ago. Look up Liberty Link. It's the word liberty with a chain around it. Truth in advertising. All right, so Liberty Link blocks glyphosate. Glyphosate blocks the essential amino acids that are known as I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the word. Carbon rings. Aromatic. Their aromatic amino acids are blocked by glyphosate. So the reason glyphosate kills anything that it touches is because it's blocking the ability of amino acids to build proteins, basically. And so it's deleting 4 of the critical 22 amino acids out of the food chain. And so we're starting to misspell proteins all over the place when we start spraying glyphosate at this volume. So anyway, that's kind of where the chronic pain thing really set in. I have great fear around killing pain. Again, I mentioned it during our talk this morning. Pain is your North Star to the problem. It will get you right there, right now, immediately. You don't have to sit around and be like, I wonder what my problem is. Your nervous system is like, hello, it is literally right here. Why are you taking the narcotic? I'm showing you the problem right here. And if anybody's ever had myofascial release therapy, it's crazy. You just go and push your thumb into the most painful point in your body for 3 minutes, and the pain goes away. So 3 minutes of manual therapy, or 12 hours of a narcotic. And so we selected the narcotic because we're not touching each other. It's that simple. We stopped touching each other and we went into pain, people. Why is there a chronic pain epidemic? Because there is a loneliness epidemic. I watched this in hospice to my greatest joy. I had an awesome hospice team. I loved them. Being a medical director of a hospice, you felt like you were a superhero beyond anything because people were just terrified. They had been through a hellhole of hospitals for 6 months as they declined, and then you rush in and you've got clergy, you've got the 2 Reiki therapists, you've got the volunteer who's just there to listen. Like, it's an unbelievable team that suddenly comes around this patient. And it's the most beautiful thing to exercise. Everything gets beautiful really quickly. And the patients just relax in this state of being seen and cared for. And it was my Reiki therapists that were a part of our hospice team that showed me the power of touch. So powerful that you don't even need to touch them. Reiki just holds the energy in a centimeter or 2 from the body, right? So you take the most basic thing is you build a snowball of energy and then you push it into the place of pain. You've not even touched the patient, you've just offered the potential energy of the universe that's in vacuum space to the human body. You can deliver universes, people. Make a snowball of vacuum space, pack it tight until you can feel your palms buzzing. You can feel space. You can feel the energy within space-time. Pack it until your palms are buzzing and then push it into somebody's low back. They will gasp for the release of pain. It feels so good to be nurtured. We do not need narcotics. We need a little bit of the universe gifted to us by the hands of another. We just need to touch each other more. It's so simple. And so this cascade, as incredible as it is showing us the path out. And so Project Biome is my nonprofit, and I'll try to work this maybe into my last talk on Saturday. So for those of you staying throughout the week, I'm going to show you what Mother Earth has planned for us, because it's beautiful. And I need to cut you loose now because I think we've been here too long. But